No movie has seeped so thoroughly into the public consciousness like Psycho. The modest black and white production sent shockwaves through audiences who experienced it in 1960. Psycho was somewhat of a red-headed stepchild in Alfred Hitchcock's filmmaking life. He was coming off 2 aborted projects, and competition in the thriller genre from other filmmakers was making him seem a bit long in the tooth. Paramount Studios refused to give him the budget he wanted, preferring instead he make one of his usual glossy, star-studded thrillers, deeming Psycho too repulsive. His hand forced, Hitch decided to instead shoot it cheaply and using the television crew from his show Alfred Hitchcock Presents. Paramount threw up more roadblocks, balking at his stripped-down approach, and claimed that all their sound stages were booked. Undeterred, Hitch offered to finance the movie himself for 60% of the profits and film it at Universal Studios, suggesting Paramount distribute the film. Finally, they accepted, and Psycho was a go. Little did Paramount realize just how much of a phenomenon Psycho would become and how much money they'd left on the table. Hitchcock would make some $15 million from his substantial share of the profits and had a classic on his hands. His gamble and belief in the material paid off in spades. Of course, no one can forget the famous shower scene in which Marion Crane is brutally murdered in cold blood by what would turn out to be Norman Bates dressed as his mother. This simple detail is a nexus point for one of the major thematic elements of Psycho. In order to understand this, we have to go back to the beginning. Marion Crane is involved with a man named Sam Loomis, who is unavailable because of his debts to his ex-wife. Because of this, they cannot get married. Later, Marion sees an opportunity while collecting a large sum of money from one of her boss's clients, which she has been tasked to put in the bank. Instead, she skips town with the money, planning to rendezvous with Sam and use the stolen cash to get married and potentially pay off his debt. An important moment happens when Marion is stopped at a crosswalk and spots her boss, who looks at her in a suspicious manner. At this exact moment, the famous strings from the Psycho theme kick in, and later we hear all sorts of incriminating scenarios over shots of Marion driving. The cop asking the car dealer about her papers, her boss from work inquiring about her whereabouts. One could assume these conversations have actually taken place, but an important detail demonstrates they are likely happening in her head. When her boss's client begins venting over his lost cash, we see a bit of a smile cross Marion's face. Clearly, she is imagining the man's torment and getting a bit of twisted satisfaction from it. Earlier, he was smug and arrogant when speaking to her, and boasted about buying his daughter happiness in the form of a wedding present. It is easy to imagine her enjoying his misery, after struggling herself to get through life without the money to marry her own man. So it would appear these conversations were happening in Marion's head all along, and this greatly supports the idea that her guilt plays a major factor in the events to come. This guilt seems to follow her the moment she is spotted by her boss. She is questioned by a cop for sleeping on the side of the road, and notice the cop appears as she's sleeping, as if her own dreaming subconscious conjured the man out of thin air, and he follows her to the car dealer, watching her as she ditches her old ride in a great big hurry. Psycho is considered the granddaddy of all slasher films, and one of the major thematic elements of the slasher is guilt and transgression. Unwitting teenagers being stalked and slaughtered one by one, often by a shadowy figure, in a sense a manifestation of retribution itself, come to enact a kind of puritanical justice over what our Christian-founded society deems unacceptable: drinking, drugs, and sex. Psycho began this trend, but in a more psychologically complex manner. Marion's apparent transgressions are more straightforward. She's clearly broken the law by stealing this money, but it's her guilt that seems to carry over throughout the film until her tragic end. The teenagers in slashers don't feel guilty over what they've done, and in a way, that makes the killer's actions all the more vicious. He is punishing ignorance and apathy just as much as he is punishing their transgressions. Psycho's thematic musings become more complex once Norman Bates enters the picture. By now, we all know what Norman's deal is. He dresses up as his dead mother, whom he murdered along with her lover in order to kill other people. This psychological transference of mother to son is a direct result of Norman's severe guilt over what he's done to her. He stole her corpse and preserved it, pretending that she was still alive. In order to complete the illusion, He began dressing up as Mrs. Bates and eventually begins killing, starting with 2 young girls. Norman's mother was a jealous woman, scolding him whenever he'd become attracted to a woman. In Norman's mind, mother becomes jealous to the point of murder, but Norman's real mother never murdered anyone. The killer's rage is the result of Norman, not his mother. It is what Norman believes his mother wants to do, not what she'd actually do. In a sense, this is Norman's way of absolving himself of any wrongdoing. In Norman's mind, he is an innocent, hard-working do-gooder, and his mother is a jealous freak who won't let him be with the objects of his affection. In order to complete this barrier, Norman kills them. It is an exaggeration of the truth, a way for Norman to explain away his own inadequacies in resisting his mother's tyrannical, domineering personality. Norman was too weak to resist his mother's wishes. The guilt over this causes him to exaggerate her behavior to include psychopathic tendencies, when in reality, she was nothing of the sort. Her crimes were being too much of a prude, not murder. So once Marion shows up, you have 2 people plagued with guilt in the same room. Is Norman attracted to Marion physically, or does he recognize something familiar in her? There are some clues that it's the latter. Once Marion arrives at the motel, she is reflected in a mirror, not once, but twice. Once in the office and again in her room, suggesting there is a piece of her aside from her physical body that is taking up residence in the space between her and Norman. And once Norman comes back with the food, this time it is he who is reflected in the glass window, and again Marion reflected in the glass of the door, followed by this key shot. Pay attention as the characters cross each other and swap positions. Marion starts on the right and ends up sitting on the left, while Norman starts on the left and ends up sitting on the right, as if they are 2 sides of the same coin, swiveling around each other, suggesting they have more in common than at first glance. And the various birds in the room, hovering over the proceedings, watching their every move. This is a nod in the direction of the guilty conscience and its paranoia of being watched, much like Marion was paranoid about being found out earlier in the film. And her last name is Crane, like the bird, and she is from Phoenix, like the powerful bird in ancient Greek mythology. Norman also asks what she's running away from, and their conversation becomes about various traps in life and the desire to escape. Almost nothing in this conversation has anything to do with a supposed physical attraction to Marion. He doesn't flirt with her. He doesn't ask whether she is married or has a boyfriend. He doesn't make any kind of pass. Everything is about the subtext of the guilt they're both trapped in. And when Norman goes on about his mother, Hitchcock introduces these low-angle shots with the birds hovering over Norman, watching him, reinforcing his guilt. And at the end of the scene, once again they cross positions in the same frame. This after Marion confesses she is going back to Phoenix to set things right, her guilt having overwhelmed her. The easy and obvious answer is that Norman is attracted to Marion physically. After all, she is an attractive woman. His mother immediately scolds him for having dinner with her, and now he watches her through the peephole. But he stops, just as she's about to undress for the shower, suggesting it is not the physical attraction that is causing him to peep, but awaiting his chance to murder her once she started taking a shower. Norman has recognized something guilty in Marion, and acting as the great equalizer, he dons his mother's so-called persona and murders Marion in the famous shower scene we've come to know and love. It is important to remember that Mrs. Bates was not a killer. Norman's penchant for murder stems from his own guilt, but is it guilt over being attracted to these women, or guilt over the fact that these women have allowed him to imagine a life without the looming shadow of his mother? Norman becomes nearly incensed when Marion suggests he put her away somewhere, which would free Norman from her clutches. In slashers, the killers often target young people who are enjoying the traits of youth and vitality. They are young, free, enjoying life and the possibilities of a bright future. The killers aren't killing them out of some misplaced hatred, as much as eliminating what reminds them of something they could never have. Many of the killers in these movies turn out to be lonely, disillusioned young men who are the opposite of the people they kill. Norman Bates' twisted motivation for murder could be seen as the original sin of the slasher genre. If you enjoyed this video, consider hitting the like and subscribe button, as I'll be posting more content in the future. Thanks for watching.